Hello everyone, welcome to yet another day in the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And while we are clearly seeing no positive movement when it comes to the grooming gangs and seeking justice for the victims of said gangs, we don't even have practically anything from this Labour government that is in any way going to give us any positive future from what I can see. The only positive reaction I've seen from the public for anything that this government has done has been to do with quashing the riots last summer. That is the only thing I've seen the public respond positively to. When it comes to every other issue, they're just terrible. And this was all predictable for us political junkies who were on the right side of the political spectrum, and an awful lot of people knew that Labour were going to be worse than the Tories on the economy. However, I was of the opinion that they wouldn't be too bad, but so far I have been nothing but shocked at just how bad they are. For instance, back in December, UK economy shrinks for second month in a row. Now, that is 2/3 of a whole quarter, and should that trend continue for a second quarter, officially we will be in a recession. And that seems to be the way we're going. Anyway, let's get into this article. So official figures showed a 0.1% drop despite expectations that the economy would return to growth after the fall in September, which again was under Labour. Now, to be absolutely fair to Labour, the first couple of months after a budget, you can't put the entire onus on Labour there. However, if the prediction goes from there will be growth to there is a drop, and that happens after a budget, it clearly shows that there is no confidence, or at least less confidence in this budget than if they kept on the old Tory one. The ONS has said activity had stalled or declined with pubs, restaurants and retail among sectors reporting weak months. And as someone from the UK, that is because prices seem to be climbing quicker than maybe some of our wages. Rachel Reeves said the figure was disappointing, but added, "We have put in place policies to deliver long-term economic growth." In other words, things will get worse before they get better. Will things get better from these budget policies? Absolutely not. It is a tax more to the point that we are being taxed more than during World War II, which is an understandable time to be taxed up to the eyeballs. And for that money then to be spent, and an awful lot of it to be spent on, well, further borrowing to do what exactly? Well, apparently to pay for Mauritius to take the Chagos Islands, and not only that, but to pay for all the union reps that Labour pretty much exclusively represent. In other words, Labour do this all the time, by the way. Every time they're in, they will bring the country to its knees because the unions just have an absolutely shed load of power. And then once that gets too much, you end up with a party in that effectively breaks the kneecaps of these unions. And this is probably going to happen again, because this is absolutely ridiculous. Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride said, "This fall in growth shows the stark impact of the Chancellor's decisions and continually talking down the economy." Because that was something they were constantly saying, we can't do all the things we wanted to, because it turns out that the UK economy just sucks. And obviously, a lot of people are not willing to invest in a country where the literal leaders are saying it sucks. KPMG's chief economist Yael Selfin said that activity was held back by uncertainty ahead of the budget on 30 October as businesses and consumers held back spending. So this is all Labour have had to show for their 6 months or so in office so far. Little more than a shrinking economy, and bear in mind, by the way, that's pure GDP numbers. GDP per capita, given that there is still an awful lot of immigrants coming in and rising the population, that is going to be falling quicker than 0.1%. So great, we're all poorer as well, despite the fact that we're constantly told that immigration is supposed to raise these statistics. But the thing is that these headlines and news stories just keep coming out. There is no confidence in the economy at this point. Because if we fast forward to this week, tax rises push business confidence to two-year low. So the budgets that had a bunch of tax rises because, our public services are underfunded, therefore we need more taxes, well, that is put business confidence to a two-year low, which in turn, bear in mind a two-year low is post-COVID, but now that we are out of said crisis, we should be at a point where the economy is doing well, because effectively we don't have a pandemic that we have to shut down the country for, and there should be confidence to take business risks. But no, we had to put taxes up to World War II levels and above, because instead we borrowed money from the future to pay for people to not work with the furlough scheme and things like that. Which, by the way, Labour were pushing for it to be longer and actually be more expensive. So the £40 billion of tax rises that was supposed to make up for a complete nonsense £22 billion black hole have pushed business confidence down to the lowest level since the aftermath of the Liz Truss mini-budget, researchers have found. I mean, that was the other thing, the LDI crisis. That at this point, if people are still blaming Liz Truss for, they are just willfully ignorant or just malicious liars. In the final 3 months of the last year, 49% of the nearly 5,000 companies surveyed by the British Chambers of Commerce said they expected income to grow over the next 12 months, which is the lowest level since the final months of 2022. In other words, less than half of all businesses, at least surveyed here, don't expect to grow. They either expect to stay completely stagnant or actually contract. It's not a very good pro-business budget if more than half of all companies in the or more than half of these surveyed companies, which is a pretty big sample size, I'll add, don't have confidence that they'll make money this year. Anyway, Truss, Britain's shortest-serving Prime Minister, and Kwasi Kwarteng, her Chancellor, nearly ignited a financial crisis by launching £45 billion of unfunded tax cuts. I really hate that term. In September 2022, and yes, I think in hindsight, the supply-side reforms really should have come before the budget, but they were rushing because they didn't have long enough really to, do it slowly, because they only had about a year and a half to 2 years before the next election, and they really needed results. Amid double-digit inflation and rising interest rates, the package forced an emergency intervention by the Bank of England in financial markets to quash the panic. Yes, that was the LDI crisis, and once again there is absolutely no mention that the Bank of England did not regulate LDIs, or liability-dependent investments, which were effectively massively attached to the bond market and effectively leave a ticking time bomb for absolutely any government that if they do anything to affect the bond market means that yes, you get this crash. Does the Bank of England get any blame for this? No, because Liz Truss keeps pointing it out. However, a separate report published on Monday by KPMG said that the UK economic growth was on track to more than double this year thanks to interest rate cuts and higher government spending. Well, the interest rates haven't been cut, so I don't know what they're talking about. And also, Britain's economic growth, especially with the contractions at the end of last year, the end of last year in 2025 now, mean that effectively the UK's growth economically is going to move from 0.2 to 0.4. Which, bear in mind, when inflation is over 2% now, does actually mean in real terms we're getting poorer anyway, so it's largely pointless. The firm's economists projected that the UK economy will grow by 1.7% in 2025, up from an expected 0.8% last year. Official GDP figures for 2024 as a whole are not yet available, but this is my point. 1.7% growth, well, when your inflation's over 2%, that in real terms is a contraction. So things are getting worse. So these two reports illustrate the contradictory nature of the Chancellor's inaugural budget. While tax increases, which mostly fell on companies, have knocked sentiment and hiring intentions, the revenue raised from the measures will boost growth and inflation in the short term. Reeves also increased borrowing by $30 billion to fund the largest uplift in public investment for a generation, further stimulating activity but also price pressures. Yeah, this is what I mean by Keynesian economics, by the way. Oh, the $30 billion that the government are going to spend, totally not going to be wasted, totally going to be the most efficient use of that $30 billion. Put it into public services, it'll be totally fine. Just keep the NHS going as it is now. It's not a total waste. KPMG said that the economic growth would be buoyed by a looser monetary and fiscal policy stance this year. The consultancy forecast that the Bank of England will lower borrowing costs to 4% from 4.75% currently. More than 6 in 10 companies said they were concerned about taxes, including national insurance contributions. The BCC found the Chancellor has raised the main rate of employers' NICs to 15% from 13.8% and lowered the threshold where they kick in to 5,000 from 9,100, amounting to a 25 billion tax increase. Collectively, Reeves increases taxes by 40 billion in the budget. Yes, and to translate that to people who don't have to worry about payroll, that includes me, what that effectively means is that there is a contribution to national insurance that an employer pays for all of their employees, and for every penny that they earn over £5,000 now, they have to pay 15% of that to the government for the national insurance contribution. And the simple matter of fact is, and I have heard many of you in the comments say it before, it's led to people being fired, people not being able to get jobs that they were looking for. we now have the least hiring and looking for a new job confidence, I guess you'd call it, than we've had in quite some time. And again, if this sort of thing was happening under the Tories, it would be non-stop being reported all over the front pages of even the BBC and the Guardian and things like that. Are you seeing that, though? No, not particularly, but then again, they're not really reporting the grooming gang stuff properly either, so what do you expect? At the end of the day, they went pretty mask off with their propaganda positions, so why would you expect anything different? Anyway, that's on the employer-employee side. What about the business and customer side? Well, firms to raise prices due to tax and wage increases. Upon what planet can anyone call this budget a success? How is any of this, in any way, a budget for growth? So more than half of the companies are planning to raise prices in the next 3 months as they face a pressure cooker of rising costs and taxes, according to one of the UK's largest business groups. The British Chambers of Commerce said its survey of nearly 5,000 firms suggested confidence have slumped. Well, we just read that in the Times, obviously. Nearly two-thirds told the BCC they were worried about taxes following the budget, which announced a raise to national insurance contributions paid by firms from April. Treasury spokesperson said the budget delivered stability for businesses, yes, stability that things are going to get worse, and more than half of employers would either see cut or no change to their national insurance bills. Well, that's just complete nonsense. That's only true if they end up firing most of their staff. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. How does it... Is a Treasury spokesperson a Labour staffer, or is it part of the civil service? Because if it's a Labour staffer, I could at least understand the lie there, but if it's a civil servant, well, I suppose I can still understand the lie, but it's a pretty brazen one for someone who's supposed to have political neutrality. Raising prices risks stoking inflation at a time when many people are struggling with cost of living. Oh, this is the obfuscation of what inflation means. There's monetary inflation, which is the money printing kind, and then there's the kind that MMTers like to talk about, which is, price inflation. But they always obfuscate which one they mean, and this one just means price inflation. Of course, if prices go up, that is literally what price inflation is, so pointless sentence. While the rate of inflation, which measures the pace of price rises, well, it measures the value of money, has fallen sharply from record highs in 2022, it rose in both October and November. The BCC survey, which was conducted after the budget, found that more than half, 55% of firms, expect to raise their price in the next 3 months, up from the previous reading of 39%. Which is just great for everyone living in the UK who want to see the opposite of that happening. You know, a lot of people want to see more value for their money rather than having a bit of a wage raise just to see all other prices shoot up quicker than the wage raise. Oh, and guess what? With national insurance contributions, do you think businesses are going to be more willing to allow for employees, to have their wages risen? Of course not. Anyway, I could go through all these business statistics till the cows come home. You get the idea at this point. What this budget has done is reduce business confidence, effectively made most businesses plan for either firing people, not giving them raises, or upping their prices to the customer, which is bad for pretty much everyone involved in the UK at all. It's not going to up productivity in any way. It is continuing the stagnation or decline of Britain's economy. But this gets a hell of a lot worse when you end up looking at the gilt yields or the interest rate for government bonds, because 10-year gilt yields have now hit the highest level since the financial crisis, and as you can see from this graph, it's actually been quite historically normal for these numbers to go anywhere between 4 and 5%. Obviously post 2008, because we wanted easy borrowing, that tended to go down and hover between 2 and 1%, although obviously when that was starting off it was between 3 and 4, and obviously it spiked up with Liz Truss, who gets all the blame for the Bank of England's screw up, but either way. When it comes to Rachel Reeves, though, as I say, you don't see these things in The Guardian or on the BBC, whereas obviously when Liz Truss caused that big spike in 2022, absolutely everyone was up in arms. Oh, she needs to be sacked, this is awful, this is the worst economic crisis that Britain has ever seen, and she was sacked. Do you see any calls for that for Rachel Reeves from any of the right-on people? Of course not. But as I say, as you can see from this graph, they have gone right up, and what that actually means is that the cost of borrowing has absolutely skyrocketed, And that means that the headroom that Rachel Reeves originally had has effectively shrunk as Robert Peston goes into. So this spike in the government's borrowing costs, notably the rise in the yield on 30-year gilts as well as 10 to a 27-year high, is all about investors' diminishing confidence in the UK's growth prospects. It risks pushing the UK into a vicious downward spiral because the higher borrowing costs increase the risk of more tax rises and an even stronger economic headwind. And of course, more tax rises means less business confidence and more people getting fired, people not getting the rises in wages that they expect, and of course, price rises will go up as well, etc., etc. Starmer, for the sake of the UK, desperately needs a persuasive plan for growth because it simply isn't working. And obviously, as this spiral keeps going, the cost of borrowing goes up until there's just a point where it's impossible for Britain to grow. And then we really are screwed, because how are the government going to pay for any of this? Well, the most direct way is money printing, and then you get a Weimar situation. And, well, let's just say that in that situation, reform is going to look incredibly sensible. But for those who don't know, Robert Peston is ITV's political editor, or at least he was, and he now runs the podcast The Rest Is Money. He's not actually a great economist, to be quite frank with you. However, at the very least, he can quite clearly see that this route that Labour have gone down is incredibly, incredibly woeful. And this is effectively him saying in a very nice way that Labour are basically screwed. And there is absolutely no way that they are not raising taxes again. And my God, when it comes down to it, I just don't see any good route for the United Kingdom to go, along with all the other scandals that they've been having. And now that a lot of people have finally seen that Labour are as incompetent as the Tories were saying, which means slightly more incompetent than the Tories, the next few elections are without a doubt going to be wild. And it is a future I look forward to because it is one where, frankly, Reform are probably going to do very well. So let's look forward to that, and to a economic policy that looks much more toward a free market than this Keynesian jail that we have found ourselves in for, well, decades at this point, almost a century, apart from that blip with Margaret Thatcher. But yes, sorry for the economic black pill, but Labour are in charge, so what did you expect? Anyway, for me, now it is shill time, so videos out as and when I can make them. Obviously at this point it's nearly once a day. Next Tuesday we have Tosh News, so we'll be going through an awful lot of news and headlines with a panel over on the Worcester Club, so do go subscribe over there and join the Discord down below. And then, of course, next Saturday it's Laughing at the Guardian with some whammon, so hopefully that will give us a bit of a respite. As for how you, loyal viewer, can support me, if you're not already, you can subscribe. If you really like my work, you can always donate via Super Chat, Super Thanks, or becoming a member. The only thing that you get from that is my gratitude. It's more of a donation than anything. So I'm, of course, very thankful to all of you who are members and do give Super Chats or Super Thanks. I would not be able to do this to the extent I do without your help, so thank you very much. I think with that, though, that's everything I had for you for today. So once again, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.